Hello, I'm Esther Gitu Yuat. It's Thursday, April 7th. This is Africa 54.
International aid groups sound the alarm on West Africa's escalating food crisis. Thousands of Sudanese take to the streets in a new round of anti-coup protests. And militias supplement security in Northern Ivory Coast as further instability looms.
The drought in West Africa is just one of the reasons life is miserable for many residents in the region. Nearly a dozen international organizations say West Africa is facing its worst food crisis in a decade due to increasing conflict, droughts, floods, and the war in Ukraine. Africa 54 managing editor Vincent Makori has more.
The number of West Africans needing emergency food assistance has nearly quadrupled from 7 million in 2015 to 27 million in 2022. Countries affected include Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, Mali, and Nigeria, where thousands have also been displaced because of rising Islamic extremist violence, according to the latest report by international organizations.
It's an alert to the world. We're witnessing right now 27 million people in West Africa were affected by what we could consider the worst food crisis from the past 10 years. And if nothing is done, 11 million more people will join this group, making it to 38 million people would be affected.
Conflict in the region is forcing people from their land, and COVID-19 restrictions have closed borders to trade and pushed up prices. Drought and poor rainfall have reduced the food sources in many communities in the Central Sahel region. Food prices have increased by up to 30% in West Africa.
This is 40% more than the number we had last year at the same time, at the same period. And this is 4 times more than the numbers we used to see 10 years ago. So this is why we really want to call on donors' attention, on government's attention, because we know that there are so many other crises here and there, but this crisis do deserve also, to be managed, do deserve to be talked about, do deserve to be visible, and people who are suffering from this food crisis in West Africa do deserve humanitarian assistance.
According to Asalama Dawalak City, Oxfam's regional director for Western Central Africa, cereal production in some parts of the Sahel has dropped by about 1/3 compared to last year. She cites the crisis in Ukraine as the reason.
Another important driver that is new is the crisis in Ukraine. 6 out of the 12 countries where Oxfam operates in West Africa import their wheat from Ukraine or Russia. And because of this crisis, in Ukraine, this is no more possible. And if they cannot import wheat, that means it's creating shortage in the food available in the countries, and therefore, increasing the prices and making it very difficult for people to afford food.
The crisis in Europe is also resulting in funding cuts to aid in Africa. Aid agencies say $4 billion is needed to provide adequate support to the continent. Vincent Makori, VOA News.
After concluding a visit to Ituri province in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, an area which has been hard hit by attacks on civilians, UNICEF Executive Director Catherine Russell is appealing for an urgent political resolution to end ongoing violence. While in Ituri, Russell traveled to Roy, the site of a camp that is now home to an estimated 63,000 people, including 36,000 children who have been internally displaced by conflict and violence. Many of those sheltering at the camp arrived last November after being driven from a different camp for the internally displaced in the nearby town of Drodro that was attacked by men wielding machetes.
I think the problem is the conflict's been going on for a long time. I think that the international community doesn't know how to solve the problem because the problem is so difficult. You know, all you know is that there are militias fighting militias. People are being killed here in terrible numbers, but nobody really quite understands it. Even a staff person who's been here for years told me he has trouble understanding exactly what's going on. But at the end of the day, the problem is innocent people are being killed. Children are being killed here, and that's what we have to respond to. And yes, people are weary of it. I understand that. People are weary of these conflicts that never end, but the people are still suffering. This problem is still here, and these people are still suffering, and we need to help them.
Violence that has caused multiple displacements in the area has continued over the past 2 weeks and show no signs of stopping. Thousands of Sudanese are rallying in new protests against an October military coup that plunged the country into political turmoil and aggravated its economic woes. The demonstrations are the latest effort to pressure the ruling generals whose takeover triggered near daily street protests demanding civilian rule. The coup upended Sudan's transition to democracy after 3 decades of repression and international isolation under autocratic President Omar al-Bashir. Sudan has been on a fragile path to democracy since a popular uprising forced the military to remove al-Bashir and his Islamist government in April 2019. Supporters and members of a committee that honors the memory of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary leader, gathered at the monument built at the place of his 1987 assassination. A military trial convicted several people, including former President Blaise Compaoré. The 6-month trial was actively followed by many for whom Sankara's death remains a dark stain in the country's history. A fiery Marxist-Leninist who blasted the West for neocolonialism and hypocrisy. Sankara was shot and killed in October of 1987. His death came a little more than 4 years after he rose to power as an army captain at 33 years old. Sankara and 12 colleagues were killed by a hit squad at a meeting of the ruling National Revolutionary Council.
It restores something at a global level, and I think that all the people of Burkina Faso should be proud. Proud because we have a competent justice system that is capable, 35 years later, with 20,000 pages, of speaking justice, of speaking the law.
There's a reason for satisfaction, because we were able to put names to faces. We were able to determine who did what that day. At the very least, the young people who sacrificed themselves on the 30th and 31st were able to see the faces of those who stopped the road of the revolution by murdering Thomas.
In the case of Thomas Sankara and his companions, justice will allow us to take a step forward in the knowledge of the truth and justice for Thomas Sankara and his fallen companions. This allows the families today to know the truth and slowly and surely begin to mourn.
Discussing the Sankara's death was taboo in Burkina Faso throughout the 27-year reign of Compaoré. For more on what this sentence means for the Sankara family and Burkinabes, I'm joined live via Skype from Pennsylvania by Nyaka Lagoke, Assistant Professor of History and Pan-Africana Studies at Lincoln University. Nyaka, has justice finally been served?
Yes, yes and no. Yes, because we waited for that moment for over 30 years. And then we could say that justice was delayed, but justice was served. But it is an incomplete justice because Compaoré has to serve. And then also because we have to go beyond Blaise Compaoré, who was the hand that was used to assassinate Thomas Sankara and to try and kill Pan-Africanism. So there are some perpetrators, some people who were behind the crime, such as some agencies in the West, and then France certainly is one of them.
Do you expect that Ivory Coast will now hand over former President Blaise Compaoré to Burkina Faso to face justice?
Oh, no, it's not going to happen. The reason why Blaise Compaoré could not be tried before now is because he was in power, and then he was using his power in order to prevent any type of justice. So now he's being protected by Alassane Ouattara, the president of Ivory Coast, whom he helped come to power after founding the rebellion and then bringing some strategic help to the rebels who were fighting on behalf of Mr. Ouattara. But if there is a political change in Ivory Coast, the same thing that happened in Burkina Faso, certainly Blaise Compaoré can be brought to justice, can be taken to a prison in Burkina Faso.
Professor, very briefly, what would amount to justice for the family of Thomas Sankara after 34 years have passed since he was murdered?
Yesterday I spoke to the sister, Pauline Sankara, and then I asked her how she felt about it. She said that she's not as excited as others, maybe because she waited so long, but she has a sense of relief because finally Blaise Compaoré has been condemned before the Tribunal of History and before the Court Justice of Burkina Faso.
Very well put, Professor Nyaka. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thank you very much.
Professor Nyaka Lagoke joined us live via Skype from Lincoln University in Pennsylvania. In remote areas of Northern Ivory Coast, militiamen known as Dozos are supplementing state security amid the threat of further instability. Analysts are warning that a weak rule of law and intercommunal tensions could lead to increased stress. Groups linked to Islamic State and Al-Qaeda based in neighboring Burkina Faso and Mali have carried out attacks in Ivory Coast multiple times in the last 2 years. Henry Wilkins reports from Congo.
In the north of Ivory Coast, local militiamen called Dozos help the state provide security. Unlike the nation's prosperous south, development, security and rule of law have struggled to reach here. Armed groups linked to Islamic State and Al-Qaeda already wreak havoc, less than 100 kilometers away, over the country's northern border in Burkina Faso and Mali. As they begin to attack and try to recruit in Ivory Coast, Ivorian analysts say many of the conditions that caused conflict in Burkina Faso and Mali are present here. Lack of state security, development and intercommunal tensions. One Dozo, who gave his name only as Congo, said violence and crime led the militias to organize and supplement state security.
The rangers, the police, the gendarmerie, we work with all of them. Often they call us and tell us to join them on missions together, and they congratulate us for it.
In Burkina Faso and Mali, militia groups also emerged in areas now overrun by terror groups, where state control was weak. Bakari Ouattara runs the chapter of the Dozos in Congo, a major city in the Ivorian north.
The government does not have enough resources to install security forces in these smaller villages, especially those that are 25, 50 and 60 kilometers away from the gendarmerie or the police station. Imagine if the population is attacked. By the time the police arrive and intervene, the attackers will already have left.
He added that security in the region remains good, however. Traditional leaders in the north also supplement justice and the rule of law by arbitrating disputes.
When they have a problem that goes beyond them, they turn to me.
The traditional leader also says development in the north has improved in recent years, although the majority of those living outside of big towns or cities interviewed by VOA disagreed. Another major cause of the conflict in neighbouring countries is tension between herder and farmer communities, which one analyst says is also a problem in Ivory Coast.
The lack of cohesion between these Fulani communities and other communities, I have not yet seen a very strong action on the part of the state.
But Arthur Ranga, who advises the government on the security situation in the north, played down the issue.
So there is concern, but there is no exodus or displacement yet, because so far the government has been able to give a good military response and is also trying to build a social response.
The Ivorian Ministry of Security did not respond to an interview request by VOA. Henry Wilkins for VOA News, Congo, Ivory Coast.
Be sure to join us on Friday for our entertainment segment featuring Tolumide, the talented Nigerian-Canadian soul Afro-pop singer-songwriter. Still to come on Africa 54. The latest on the war in Ukraine. Stay with us.
Empowerment and humanity towards a better world.
Economic and social progress of every society.
Facts and information from key players rather than spectators in politics, business, science and technology.
City, rural, educated, or underprivileged. We care and we listen to what matters to you.
Your voices are our voices.
Now to the war in Ukraine. A short time ago, the United Nations General Assembly voted to suspend Russia from the UN Human Rights Council over reports of, quote, gross and systematic violations and abuses of human rights by invading Russian troops in Ukraine. The US-led push garnered 93 votes in favor, while 24 countries voted no and 58 countries abstained. Meanwhile, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken joined a special session of the nation ministers meeting in Brussels Thursday to discuss the war in Ukraine and to maintain international support for sanctions and weapons supplies. Ukrainian Foreign Minister Dmytro Kuleba is specifically calling on Germany to speed up its weapons deliveries to Ukraine, asking for planes, land-based anti-ship missiles, armored vehicles and air defense systems. German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock is discussing more arms sales to Ukraine with allies Thursday in Brussels. After more than 40 days of war, Ukrainian officials say Russia continues to shell its cities, particularly in the eastern regions of Kharkiv, Donetsk and Luhansk, after Russian forces withdrew from around Kyiv. Moscow continues to call its actions in Ukraine a special military operation, but Ukraine and the West are calling the invasion an unprovoked attack. Villages on the outskirts of the northern Ukrainian city of Chernihiv on Thursday show the effects of Russian airstrikes, heavy artillery fire, and south of Chernihiv, a hotel is still standing despite significant damage. It appears that powerful missile or artillery shell blasted through its upper levels, leaving a massive hole in the roof and destroying multiple rooms. Chernihiv, located near the border with Belarus, was not spared from the shelling, and thousands were left without electricity, heating, or water. Ukrainian officials say the departure of Russian troops from around Chernihiv was reopened a direct road link to Kyiv, but it is not yet safe enough for the city residents who had fled to return, according to the government. Ukrainian officials say bombings have destroyed more than half of the private homes on the outskirts of the city, which had a population of around 285,000 before the conflict. Moscow has regularly denied targeting civilians since it invaded Ukraine on February 24th. For more on the war in Ukraine, standing by live via Skype from Irpin is VOA reporter Anna Chernikova. Anna, what is the latest?
Hello. Today I was in the Kyiv region, particularly in the part that suffered most from the shellings and from the occupation. So the city of Irpin was already open for civilians to come, not to stay, but just to come to check over, for those especially who have their homes there. And for journalists, but still the city remains with mines. So Main roads are demined, but all the parks, all the green areas are still under the demining procedure. The cities of Buch and that suffered, well, very, very badly, as well as the city of Borodyanka, they're still closed for any visits because of the amount of mines that Russian occupiers left behind. The same situation is in Hostomel. Hostomel would be closed for 1 week, starting from yesterday until April 14th, because there are a lot of bodies on the streets. There are a lot of military techniques which left on the streets as well, and a lot of mines. So situation here, well, I mean, it's better in terms of the city is liberated, but still cities are not ready to welcome people back.
People telling you, Anna, what are their major concerns, especially in the larger Kyiv area?
The main concern for people is to come back. So people want to come back. People want to be next to their houses or in their houses if they remain there. People want back home, and this is the main concern. So I had an opportunity to talk to some of the people who left Irpin and Vorzel because of the shelling, and people are crying. People are telling that they had a feeling that they would never stay alive and they would never be able to come back. Also, there are stories of people who used to move to Irpin from Crimea in 2014, and in Crimea they lost everything they had. They started their life from scratch, and then here in Irpin they lost their life again. So, but you know, among all that, people remain very positive about the future, and people help each other. A lot of people who even lost their homes here in Kyiv region, they volunteering and they bring food, medications, clothes to those who lost everything. And you know, this is really glad to see that civilians, they help government to bring the city, all the cities back to life. So hopefully one day will come, and it will come soon, that people can come back.
Anna, thank you very much for your reporting. Anna Chanikova reporting live via Skype from Irpin, Ukraine. The United States announced new sanctions against Moscow on Wednesday following allegations that Russian forces in Ukraine massacred civilians. Henry Ridgewell reports from London.
As Ukrainian forces advance north of Kiev, they have discovered horrifying scenes of civilians who apparently were massacred by Russian troops. Moscow denies responsibility, but the evidence of alleged war crimes is mounting. The White House cited these atrocities as it outlined a new sanctions package Wednesday in coordination with G7 and European allies. They include a full block on two of Russia's largest banks, Sberbank and Alfa Bank, and on major Russian state-owned enterprises. A ban on all new investment in Russia, and on Russia's ability to make debt payments with funds subject to US jurisdiction. The sanctions also target Russian President Vladimir Putin's two daughters and family members of other Russian officials, including Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov.
Just in 1 year, our sanctions are likely to wipe out the last 15 years of Russia's economic gains. And because we've cut Russia off from importing technologies like semiconductors and encryption security and critical components of quantum technology that they need to compete in the 21st century, we're going to stifle Russia's ability and its economy to grow for years to come.
Britain also approved a new sanctions package Wednesday.
Banning Russian ships from our ports, cracking down on more Russian banks, going after industries that are filling Putin's war chest, like gold.
The European Union is also finalising new sanctions targeting Russia's energy sector.
The new package includes a ban on coal import. And, ladies and gentlemen, I think that measures on oil and even gas will also be needed sooner or later.
The EU revealed Wednesday that it had made $38 billion in energy payments to Russia, providing just over $1 billion in military aid to Ukraine. For Ukraine, Europe isn't moving fast enough, says analyst Liana Fix.
The question is only how fast will this take place, and will it be fast enough to help Ukraine in improving their negotiation position and their fighting position towards Moscow.
The raft of Western sanctions came as NATO foreign ministers began a two-day meeting in Brussels Wednesday. Washington this week announced a further $100 million in military aid for Ukraine, including Javelin anti-tank missiles.
We set out to do three things if Russia decided to pursue this horrific aggression against Ukraine. One was to support our Ukrainian partners. We're doing that. Two was to put extraordinary pressure on Russia. We're doing that. Three was to make sure that we were shoring up the defenses of our own alliance, NATO, and we're doing that.
The alleged atrocities by Russian forces could change NATO's calculation, says Fix.
Especially in public opinion, they revoke memories of the past, of past atrocities in Europe. So it increases the pressure on policymakers.
Meanwhile, the Czech Republic is sending Soviet-era T-72 tanks and infantry vehicles to Ukraine, which Kiev hopes will prompt other NATO members to send heavy weapons. Henry Ridgwell for VOA News, London.
And that wraps up our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.